Welcome to the Agency of Forgotten Histories. Our job is to investigate the stories hidden in the streets of Islington. Stories of trade, drunkenness, and meat? Today's case is the food and drink spaces and how these have shaped Islington. Over the centuries, much of the social and business activities that took place here contributed to the making of this area and to how we experience it today. The evidence is everywhere, from the evolving markets to the gin craze era to Princess Alexandra's dining hall. Each one is a clue. Each one is a piece of the puzzle. And today we're putting it all together. To get to the heart of it, we need someone with the right kind of knowledge. Someone who's been around enough to know which doors to knock and which story to tell. Jane. Ah, Melusi, you're here. Time to pass the baton to you. You need to go and meet Jane from Islington Guided Walks and report back to me with your findings.
Okay, boss. I'm right on it.
Step outside, follow the trail, and see what you can find.
Hello, Jane.
Hi, Melusi. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. I've got a new case from the agency. We need to find out about food and drink in Islington and the significance of markets and eateries in this part of London.
Oh, Melusi, you've come to the right person. And to really understand Islington, you'll need to walk its streets and see the sights and relive history in person. That's what we do with Islington Guided Walks. We tell stories, old and new. We love spotting details that can be easily overlooked if you're hurrying by. And when it comes to food and drink in Islington and the history of it, there are so many places to look at. For instance, you might want to go to Smithfield Market, which used to be a livestock trading post, not just selling meat that you can buy to put straight on the plate, but actually live animals were brought to the market. And not too far from there, it was also used to carry out executions. And then round the corner from Smithfield Market, you'll find Booth's Gin Freeze, where the history of gin making can be traced back to the 1700s, which was a time when Londoners were out drinking sailors. Gin was sold by everybody. For instance, street vendors, grocers, chandlers, barbers, even brothels. Oh, and here's another idea. I think it might be worthwhile to find out about the Alexandra Trust Dining Rooms and also Whitecross Street Market that initially catered for working class people in that area.
That sounds fantastic. Where shall I start?
How about I send you to see Nigel? He knows a lot about Smithfield Market. He can tell you about the good, the bad, and the ugly of that area.
Great. Well, my name's Nigel Smith. I'm a Islington Guided Walks guide, and this area, Smithfield, is an area that I cover in one of my walks, which is called Cultural Clerkenwell.
Okay, can you please describe it to me?
Well, we are standing underneath these great cast iron arches of Smithfield Meat Market's grand avenue. It's mid-morning at the moment, and there's a few butchers still clearing stuff away. But this building was opened in 1868, and it was designed by the architect Horace Jones. He was also responsible for another great London market, Leadenhall Market in the city. He also designed Tower Bridge. And like I said, it's all sort of being packed away at the moment. But according to the Corporation of London, more than 100,000 tonnes of meat products pass through Smithfield Market each year. So this is still the largest wholesale market in the UK, although you wouldn't know that right now mid-morning on a weekday. The real action here happens between sort of 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. The meat starts arriving in refrigerated lorries about 9 o'clock at night, very, very noisy then. That is when the cutters, the butchers, they all get to work, and then by 6 in the morning, the market is closed. Well, the market is mainly used today by retail butchers, restaurateurs, hoteliers. But, if you do want to come and buy a few steaks or chops or, some of the more unusual cuts like sheephead or tripe, well worth a nighttime visit. Today, there are fewer than 50 counters, but at the market's height, which was really between World War I and World War II, there would have been more than 160 different merchants working here. Very different to what it is today. Back then, you'd have refrigerated ships. They'd come from Australia, New Zealand, South America. They'd dock at the port of London. Then they'd get these huge carcasses, huge amounts of meat from all over the world, then together with meat that had been slaughtered in the UK. They'd actually arrive by an underground railway at sidings beneath our feet, where we are standing right now, and they'd have been transported to the market, and then they'd have been lifted up. It'd been very, very loud from underneath us and from the various cold stores around the market by these vast hydraulic lifts. So this was really, back then at least, the epicenter of this sort of like food industrial complex. This area, Smithfield, has a very colourful history. Standing on this spot 900 years ago, we would have been outside the city walls, pretty rural environment. The name Smithfield is said to be derived from smooth field. That is what was here. And there's been a market here since at least the 12th century. One early text describes that every Friday here, there is a celebrated rendezvous of fine horses to be sold, pigs with deep flanks, and cows and oxen of immense bulk. But the fields also provided grounds for the annual St. Bartholomew cloth fair and its associated entertainments. We're very close to the St. Bartholomew, the great church, oldest parish church in London. This was also a field for jousting tournaments, blood sports, and another popular public spectacle, executions. So just across the road from where we're standing in the market is St. Bart's Hospital. There's a plaque there commemorating William Wallace, immortalised in the film Braveheart. In 1305, he was charged with treason and sentenced to what was called a traitor's death here at Smithfield. This was one of the grisliest ways to die in the Middle Ages. After a brief trial, Wallace was executed the same day. He was dragged naked to Smithfield from the Tower of London by a team of horses. That's about 1.5 miles. He was then hung from a scaffold by his neck, cut down while he was still alive, disemboweled, castrated, and beheaded. So not quite the heroic martyr's death you see if you've seen the movie Braveheart. So executions, bear baiting, jousting, that has all gone, but the market here has endured. In 1726, Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, he called the market without question the greatest in the world. And by the 19th century, thousands of heads of livestock were brought here from all over the country to be sold. In Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens, he very memorably captures Smithfield in the 1830s as being, this is a quote, covered nearly ankle deep with filth and mire, while the bleating of sheep, the grunting and squeaking of pigs, the shouts, oaths and quarrelling on all sides rendered it a stunning and bewildering scene. In his words, it was a place where countrymen, butchers, drovers, hawkers, boys, thieves, idlers and vagabonds of every low grade were mingled together in a mass.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I would like to find out about the Alexandra Dining Room.
Alexandra Dining Rooms are fascinating history, and one of my fellow guides, John Finn, will be delighted, I'm sure, to tell you more about it.
Hello, I'm John. I'm one of the Clerkenwell guides, and I'm pleased to be able to bring you here today to look at a building that not many people take a notice of. Today, this area is incredibly fashionable. Lots of restaurants, lots of coffee shops and studios and creative work going on around here. But back 100 years ago, in the 1920s, there were lots of poor people living here who had no kitchens in their houses. My grandmother lived 2 streets away from here. She was lucky to have a kitchen, but lots of people didn't, and they would have to go and find their food in eating houses or coffee shops or pubs. A man called Sir Thomas Lipton, a very rich man, he owned a whole chain of grocery shops and he imported tea, so people would have known about Lipton's tea. And he proposed to build a series of dining rooms for working class people. He got the sponsorship of Princess Alexandra, who was about to become the Queen, Edward VII's wife. And so this was set up. This is the first of what was intended to be a whole series of them, but this was the only one that actually ever got built. So what happened in here? There are 4 floors. On the very top floor, there was a kitchen with the most up-to-date equipment that they could get. It was capable of making 500 gallons of soup every day and cooking 1,200 meat puddings at one go, and lots of other labour-saving devices. On the floors below, there were dining rooms, one for men and one for women. So, that was a sort of view at the time. And you could get, for the equivalent of a 15p today, you could get soup, bread, a piece of cake and tea and coffee. The biggest price you could pay here was the equivalent of £1.50 for a 3-course meal. So we've walked a few yards from where we were before, the dining rooms, into Whitecross Street. Basically you can eat the world here. All the cuisines you could ever want are down this street. And at lunchtime, like today where we are now, it's absolutely crowded with people. But again, like the previous stop, this was an area that was incredibly poor, and so this was a very popular market. The road originally was much longer than it is today. It went almost to the city gates, but it was hit badly in the Second World War, and half of the street has now disappeared under the Barbican estate. And also down at that end, there used to be one of London's most notorious prisons. The debtors' prison of Whitecross Street was where you didn't want to go. This street was also regarded as a bit of a red light district, and it housed, in the 18th century, one of what was called London's second best prostitutes, a woman called Pris Fotheringham. I don't know who the first was, but she was famous for being down here. Anyway, that's Whitecross Street Market, so maybe you might want to go off now and try and sample some of the stalls down at the other end.
My name's Jonathan Wober, and I'm an Islington tour guide. So here we are in Britain Street in Clerkenwell. The building is called Mountford House, and this talks to the history of gin distilling in the Clerkenwell area, specifically a company called Booth's Gin, the oldest of the Clerkenwell gin distillers. Sadly, none of them are in the area anymore. So we had this terrible affliction across London, particularly amongst the poorer people. It's usually the poorer people that get hit hardest with these kind of things. And gin was just incredibly popular and incredibly addictive and incredibly destructive. And it was made worse by the fact that the distillers were not licensed. There was something like maybe up to 6,000 premises across London where people were distilling and selling gin. So it was very easily accessible. The grain was often mixed with sawdust just to make it cheaper to produce. But worse than that, because that was relatively harmless, on the other side of the equation, people sometimes added things to give it more of a kick. For example, methylated spirits, or even worse than that, sulfuric acid, to give it more of a kick, which is clearly incredibly destructive to the human physiology. Now, there was a famous engraving done by the 18th century artist William Hogarth called Gin Alley, which depicts the consequences of indulging in gin too much. It's a brilliant piece of work, but the imagery is terrible. It's terrifying. So the authorities realised they had to do something about this. the local magistrates around the corner for Middlesex, in Clerkenwell Magistrates House just around the corner from here, they said that gin was the principal cause of all the debauchery committed among the inferior classes. So it was really something that had to be done. So after there were really 2 acts of Parliament, and finally by about 1750, the gin trade was fully regulated. So it had to be the right quality, and it could only be sold out of premises where the annual rent was more than £10 a year. So in other words, a quality establishment, and this put it out of the reach of most of the poorer people, shall we say. So the craze became under control. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, gin's booth they established in Clerkenwell around 1740, and they had their distillery on Whitecross Street, which is down to our left as we're standing here. Also nearby in Clerkenwell, there were other gin distillers that are very famous, like Nicholson's and Gordon's. So it was a big area. A lot of the reason why was because of the availability of spring water, fresh spring water in the Clerkenwell area, which also gave rise to quite a few beer brewers in this area too. Sadly, all of that's gone from the area. Now we have, as I said, there's a furniture design company here, and the design bureau and the creative industries have taken over from the brewers and the distillers and the watch and clockmakers, but that's another story. There is a pub just along here, so sometimes people are still coming to drink in a slightly more regulated way than in the gin craze of the early 18th century. And it looks like there's someone here, coming here to empty some rubbish. Okay.
I visited the Gin Freeze on Britain Street, the Smithfield Meat Market, and the Alexandra Dining Rooms. And you know what stood out for me most? Is that so much about the food and drink in this area is tied to the lives of working class people.
I'm really pleased that you found out so much and that you're enthused by the things that you learned. But there's so much more to explore here in Islington. That's what's so great about being an Islington guide, that we can share our knowledge with people like yourself who want to find out more. And if you want to find out more about other writers and other people who lived here in Islington, you can just simply go on our website and find out all the different walks that you can go on. There are tons of options to choose from. Just go to islingtonguidedwalks.com for more information and book your next walk. And we're really looking forward to seeing you again.
Well, that's another case wrapped up. I want that report on my desk by tomorrow. First thing, okay?
First thing in the morning.
Case closed. Oh. You've reached the Agency of Forgotten Histories. How can we help you? Very interesting. Well, I'll pass the message along to one of my detectives. We'll be right on it. Oh, looks like we got another forgotten history to uncover.
This has been the Agency of Forgotten Histories, presented by Islington Guided Walks and City St George's, University of London. Thanks for listening, and check out the show notes in your podcast player for links. The executive producer was Sandy Waugh, with thanks to Jane Parker and the tour guides at Islington Guided Walks.